Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us back in the All Access studio. My name is Marty Finn. I am the Talent Connect Live co-host. Thanks for coming back and joining us. Right now, I'm joined with Tim Leberecht, the co-founder and co-CEO of the Business Romantic Society. So, Tim, thank you for joining us in the
Great
studio.
to be here.
So, our first question, we're asking all our guests this. What were the career aspirations you had as a child? So, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Really exactly what I'm doing now, believe it or not. So
Really?
I really wanted to be a writer. I wanted to run an agency, which I'm doing. I wanted to be involved in events. I'm putting on my own conference. So that was definitely part of it. I mean, okay, so maybe that's half of the truth. The other,
I was going to say, there had to have been like a veterinarian.
yeah,
or
there's
like some
not a
kind of
veterinarian,
fireman, maybe.
but I think I wanted to be a soccer coach or a soccer referee.
Okay.
So that, and who knows, I might still become a referee
All right.
later on. Yeah.
Big football fan?
Big football fan.
Who's your team?
Barcelona is easy because they always win.
Oh, wow. Okay. I love your enthusiasm.
Mostly.
All right. Well, yeah, hey. All right. So switching gears a little bit, with the rise of artificial intelligence in the workforce, you've called out a need for radical humanism. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Well, I think what we've seen over the past decade or so is just like a real emphasis on data. Over the past years, 10 years or so, executives basically believe that data is the truth. And if you have all the data, the more data you have, the better your decisions. And I believe that's quite myopic. I think it's time for the pendulum to swing back and to create a counterbalance. Because the truth is, with automation, with algorithmic marketplaces, with exponential technology really invading the workplace, inherently human aspects will become more valuable, will become more important. And it's very important, I believe, that we don't only associate data with the only truth, and that we create a space and maintain a space where we can be human, so that we create space for intuition, for creativity, for imagination, for empathy, all those things that at this point, at least, only humans can do.
Right. Yeah. It can't be programmed, right?
Right.
So you've mentioned in the past that the way people determine whether or not they like their work depends on the relationships they have at work. So I have a work wife. So, people have very close relationships at work. Do you feel that artificial intelligence threatens this? And do you think people might start to feel less connected to their colleagues once workplace artificial intelligence or more of that starts to take place and develops?
Well, I think that's certainly a risk because so many of the micro interactions that make for these relationships at work, they might be removed or they might be standardized, they become processes driven by AI. I mean, look at recruiting, for example, right? Where many of the interactions are now being replaced by processes that are driven by AI, filtering out candidates and so forth. So the relationships to our colleagues, to our peers, to our manager, as many studies show, are really paramount for satisfaction at work. So we need to be careful that we don't design any human interaction out of the workplace. And by the way, organizational intimacy really comes from being vulnerable. So it's not just about having, a private chef and some nice sort of toys and happy, joyful workplace. I think a really truly human workplace that is intimate also appreciates negative emotion. So it's one where we can be sad, where you don't have to show up as the same person every day. That really creates an authentic workplace. That really creates intimacy. And I think that will be a differentiator for at least those companies that want to remain human going forward.
Yeah. And so for companies, I completely agree with the vulnerability piece. We talk about, I'm a LinkedIn employee. We talk about that a lot here. We've spoken about it a lot at Talent Connect in previous years. What is a step that you think companies can take to start to make vulnerability more of the norm within their organization?
It starts at the leadership level, and there are things that employees can do as well, certain rituals or practices. At the leadership level, I think it's just key that CEOs embody that, and that they really show and demonstrate that it's okay to be vulnerable. I mean, Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, is a great example when it comes to empathy and vulnerability. On the employee side, I think there are things that one can do. For example, mindfulness is a great tool to actually connect with your peers, with your colleagues in a different way. Just sort of recognize each other differently. And so, for example, there are now silent dinners or silent minutes, at least, at the beginning of meetings that some companies have begun to implement. It's a great way just to kind of
Silent dinner? What is this? I've never heard of this.
So it's actually a thing now. I think it was actually created in Australia. It's a worldwide movement, and companies have begun to embrace it. And I took part in 3 or 4 actually now. And it's so basically you have dinner together with colleagues and you don't say a word. Sometimes there's a musical soundtrack, which makes it a bit easier. The more radical version is that there's nothing, and it's quite strange. But speaking of intimacy, it's very nice because you really begin to see each other and to actually tolerate the silence together. And it creates a bond, although you're not like verbalizing anything, but it creates a bond that is perhaps even deeper than, language.
Non-verbal.
Yeah.
Right? Wow, I've never heard of that before. That's really interesting. So speaking again about automation technology, if this eventually helps to create a shorter work week for humans, if that's so, how do you think that could impact our relationship that we have with work and maybe even potentially like people's self-worth?
Well, there's a utopian or a positive scenario, and there's a dystopian scenario, and I think it's very much disputed. So the utopian scenario, at least let's say the optimist scenario assumes that automation will free us from mundane, monotonous work that we don't want to do anyway, and it frees us up to do work that is purposeful, meaningful, more actually focused on humans. Now, I think the challenge is, of course, that it's going to be, on the one hand, not easy to reskill people. So if you were someone who had a very process-driven task, you won't suddenly become, a media relations director. So I think that's one challenge. And I think the other challenge is that we're actually not used to having unstructured time. So the more unstructured time we're facing because of automation, the more we actually need to know ourselves, and the more we need to create a purpose for ourselves as well. Because work, in the sense of traditional employment, will probably become obsolete or not as relevant as it was, over the past 50, 60 years or so. So we need to actually all become more entrepreneurs of our own career, but also like makers of our own purpose. And that's not necessarily a skill that we're taught to develop at school. So I think that's really where it starts.
But what a great opportunity too to have that time and think about like what does that look like for you to have that free time? I think that's incredible. So what would you say to artificial intelligence skeptics who might be concerned about their job security? So if a machine can do this, I'm not needed. What would you say to those folks?
Well, there's a great line by Andrew McAfee from the MIT, who once said that it's not going to be so black and white. AI is not going to replace humans, but not immediately. But AI will very likely replace those humans who cannot work with AI. So we have to do kind of almost like it's a stretch, right? On the one hand, I think we got to embrace AI. We need to develop AI literacy and really acquire those skills and begin to work and cooperate with AI. On the other hand, those aspects of ourselves that are inherently human, empathy, imagination, creativity, artistic thinking, will become more precious. So we have to do both, which is a daunting task, but that I think is the opportunity ahead. If you are agile, emotionally agile, if you're able to reinvent yourself, if you're not limited to one specific task, then the future might look good for you. If, however, your work is based on a very vertical skill set that's very specialized and that is very much driven by efficiency and focused on linear process-driven work, then I think the future may not look so good.
So for those people who might be, I completely agree with you, and thank you for that perspective, who might be still very scared about, maybe companies are dealing with maybe an older generational workforce. What's a good step or starting point to start to get your workforce to use that kind of change mindset?
Do it. I mean, just do it.
Start.
Because there's so much concern about, AI, and it's this very, mysterious concept sometimes. And people don't forget that we're, of course, everybody's using AI. I mean, it just starts with the Google search engine that has become a part of our life. So AI is already in the center of our lives. And I think we have to demystify a little bit. And the best way to really learn about AI and how to work with AI is to do projects. It might be very, very small projects that we're tasked to do. Experimenting with AI, and also not knowing, admitting that we're not experts, right? So because I think we're now at a point in the conversation where a lot of executives or regular employees will say, "Ooh, AI, I should know about it, but I don't." And so I think it's creating these small projects and organization where it's okay to fail, where it's okay not to know, but experiencing AI, becoming comfortable with AI, I think is going to be crucial.
Which plays to that idea of vulnerability, right? So last question, it's a LinkedIn tradition. Tell us something, so you obviously have a very extensive resume background, extensive LinkedIn profile. Congratulations on that. What is something we would not know about you by looking at your LinkedIn profile?
That I'm very good at ironing.
Okay.
And I really love ironing. So, bring
Wow.
bring your shirts.
I'm not kidding you. I really could have used you this morning. It was touch and go for a while. I almost had to go to the store.
My meditation.
All right. Well, good to know. I might get your number for tomorrow. But thank you so much for joining us, Tim. We really appreciate it. Right now, I'm going to turn it to Janesh Ralan, our roving reporter, who's out on the floor right now at Talent Connect. Thank you.